So, when I say video games should be fun, what exactly do I mean? Well, that's a good question, especially since it doesn't really have an answer. Maybe I spend a little too much time on the writhing hell site that is twitter.com, but I always see arguing and debate about, well, everything when it comes to video games. That's not really what this video is about, but it's definitely what put this idea into my head. Also, I'll mention that this video isn't meant to be some sort of rebuttal against anything or anyone. This is just my thoughts on video games as a whole. Now then, what is this video really about? Well, it's about fun, and what exactly that means. But it's not so plain and simple to discuss. Fun is subjective, not everyone has fun in the same way, and that's why there are so many genres of video games, for example, because they cater to all kinds of people. The same people who have fun playing God of War or Call of Duty probably won't enjoy games like Minecraft or No Man's Sky, and vice versa. But there might be people that like all of those games, or people who like none of them and maybe prefer other genres or just specific games. People are complicated, and as such, making a video game that is fun can be challenging when you're trying to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. Today, I'm going to be looking into some major aspects of video games and determining, well, why we love video games as a whole. As such, this video is going to be broken up into multiple sections, focusing on different parts of game design and how each of them can help, or even hinder, how fun a video game actually is. Now, please remember, I am not, repeat, not, any sort of professional when it comes to anything I say in this video. I'm just speaking my mind. So, let's move on to the first section of this video. That being... Let's start with the brush that paints the broadest stroke: gameplay. Now, gameplay is the biggest and most varied part of any game, and is obviously the most important. Solid gameplay can give a game life well beyond its years. Games like the original Super Mario Bros. For NES and Mega Man X for the SNES are still played today just because of how solid their gameplay is, even with games being made the way they are today. Sometimes a simple yet tightly controlling game is what tickles people's fancy, and it's why games like Shovel Knight can exist in a modern market. But that's just one small example in a vast, and I mean vast, array of different game genres and variations within said genres, from simple life simulator games to platformers to high-paced first-person shooter games. Now don't worry. This section of the video isn't just going to be me listing the various genres of video games for you, as you probably know all of them already. Gameplay is probably the thing that most player preferences will latch onto. Some people will prefer faster, more action-packed experiences, or maybe something that's a bit slower and more tactical. Maybe even something that's just relaxing to them, or something that stresses them out by challenging them and forcing them to improve their skill. Some games have really specific systems that might scratch a certain itch you can't get from other games. Or some games might be a bit more formulaic, and as such, familiar and comfortable to people. A game being unique doesn't always mean it's good. There's a reason why so many games have similar mechanics or ideas. They work for a reason. But of course, this doesn't mean that games can't be unique, and that will be explored in a later section. But let's talk for a moment about gameplay in its rawest form. No specific type, just how it feels to play a game in general. Gameplay comes down to a number of things, like how the game's mechanics work together, and how everything feels to control. I know everyone likes to poke fun at game journalists when they say, "This game really makes you feel like blank," but that genuinely is an important part of the game, even if it's lazy writing from a review standard. If you pick up a game and think, "Oh yeah, this feels good," then that's it. Not much else matters. Graphics, story, and other aspects of a game take a back seat because you know that going forward, the game is going to feel satisfying to play regardless. Of course, repetitiveness can turn any good feeling towards gameplay sour, but the most exceptional games can push past this regardless. Because, let's be honest here, pretty much all video games suffer from being repetitive at some point. So that's why I'm going to say something that might clash with how most gamers view gameplay in accordance with other aspects of game design. Gameplay is the most important thing about a game, that's true, but everything else is a close second, and even the best gameplay can be ruined if everything else isn't to a player's preference. Now, some of you may be saying, well, obviously, and some of you may be scratching your heads here. Gameplay can be brought down by bad or aged graphics, bland sound design, a poorly written or confusing story, if the game is driven by narrative, and more. But in the same vein, games with standard, subpar, or repetitive gameplay can be carried if other aspects of the game are exceptional. God of War is a perfect example of this. Even though the combat is amazing, it does get repetitive by the end of the game, at least in my opinion. But the story, the characters, the visuals, the sound design, and the world keep you engaged because of how well they are executed. In other cases though, people might not even play a game despite how good it is, just because one aspect of a game doesn't match their preference. And that's perfectly okay. Even if a game is considered great, if there's something that's hampering your enjoyment of the game, no matter how trivial it may be, then that game might not be fun for you. You should play something that is fun for you despite how everyone else feels. When I say games should be fun, this is what I mean. No matter what, play what makes you happy. To be honest, I could actually end this video here and call it a day, but I have a lot more I want to say, so I'm not done yet. Now, let's move on to the next section of this video, which I believe covers the second most important part of what makes a game fun, and that is... Ah yes, the big G word. One of the biggest deciding factors for playing a game is the graphics. This is mostly true for anyone who plays games, but is most prevalent within the casual gamer audience. Most gamers like to laugh at people who see a game trailer or something and say, "Oh wow, this game has amazing graphics," since to most hardcore gamers, gameplay is the only important thing. But do you ever stop to think of why so many people gravitate towards how a game looks, rather than how it plays, at least at first? Well, it ties back to what I was saying about how important it is for a game to feel good to play, and a massive part of that is the visual aspect. Throwing Kratos' axe at enemies wouldn't be nearly as satisfying without how well the graphics carry the weight of the action, the force of the throw, the impact of the hit, and how enemies stagger upon being hit, the blood pouring out as you recoil the axe from their chest, or something like that, and even the camera angle all contribute to the sense of fun the player has when performing the action. Spectacle is the word that comes to mind here. Good gameplay combined with good graphics creates a spectacle for the player. High resolution mixed with smooth FPS and even well done particle effects can make any action 10 times more satisfying. Now, graphics doesn't just mean how good a game looks, also how well it runs. With the newest generations of consoles basically standardizing 60 FPS at least as a performance mode, it is pretty clear that most people who play games value how smooth a game is visually. Some people may prefer to drop down to 30 FPS for a better looking game, and that's perfectly reasonable as well. What's the point of dropping hundreds of dollars on a new console if the games aren't going to look their best? I personally believe that hitting at least 60 FPS is better than having decent graphics, but that's just my opinion. Although I actually did have my opinion challenged on this recently, because when I played Ghost of Tsushima, while the gameplay was 60 FPS, the cutscenes were brought down to a lower FPS to give them a more movie-like feeling, and that actually really appealed to me. It helped me get really invested in the characters on screen, for reasons I just can't explain, but it felt good to me. In addition to this, one of my favourite games of all time, Bloodborne, still only runs at 1080p 30 FPS on PS5. Yet I still play it a bunch because of the gameplay, the story, the lore, the world design, sound design, etc. It's all just so perfect that the lower graphical quality doesn't matter to me, even if the game would be better with a higher resolution frame rate. Get on that, Sony. In contrast though, I'm also going to use my own personal experience here to illustrate an opposing point. Here we go. Final Fantasy VII is one of the greatest RPG games ever made. The story is great, the characters are well written, and the turn-based combat is still considered one of the best of its kind today. However, I simply cannot play it. I just can't. The aged graphics, while great for their time, and they definitely have their charm, they completely take me out of the game. I've personally not enjoyed turn-based combat for a while either, but that's neither here or there. Also, the camera angle and the polygonal models really just suck the fun out of the game for me, and I can't really explain why. I'm sure fans of the game want to burn me at the stake for heresy right now, but I know I'm not the only one in this boat. I like my games to be as visually appealing as possible, and Final Fantasy VII, the original, just isn't anymore. A lot of people do find the older graphical style charming and nostalgic, and that's great, more power to you, but due to my earlier points, Final Fantasy VII isn't fun for me. The remake, on the other hand, is one of my favourite games in recent memory, and the graphics lend hugely to that. Everything just looks so flashy, and hits have this huge impact, and it's just plain cool. But fans of the original are divided on this game due to the changes made to the gameplay and the story, and as such, the remake maybe isn't as fun for some of them. Newer gamers probably won't even give older games a try because of the graphics alone, and that is something I feel that the gaming community needs to just realise and accept. Not everyone can get past their games looking dated or just not up to the highest quality, because it can pull them out of the experience. I see this a lot in people who like to get immersed in their games, like myself. Now, there is one more thing to tidy up in this section, and that's art style. Good graphics doesn't necessarily mean realistic graphics. It means whatever is pleasing to the eye. And that varies between people too. You may prefer games that have dulled colour schemes and models and textures that are close to as real life as possible, or you may prefer games that stretch what we consider to be real to be more colourful and separated from realism. I plan to touch more on realism in a later section, by the way, but let's get back on track. Red Dead Redemption 2 and the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, for example, are both considered to have great graphics, but for entirely different reasons. Even games like Deltarune or Friday Night Funkin' also have good graphics because the art style is appealing, despite it not being anything close to what is the most technologically advanced stuff we have right now. And that's the whole point. If every game sacrificed its art style and even its personality for the sake of good graphics, then games would all blend together and look kind of samey, which is actually a problem with some games. Longer running game series such as Call of Duty perhaps, or even the subgenre of anime games, both suffer from being judged due to how they all look the same to a casual audience. FPS games in general suffer from being blended together just from the first person perspective alone, let alone the fact that most FPS games try to look as real as possible to give that sense that you're already in a firefight or something like that. I think this is one of the reasons why the recent Doom games, or Overwatch, broke out in popularity the way they did, because they were refreshing to look at, with Doom being gory and action-packed with a more fantastical setting, and as such a much more reddish colour palette, and Overwatch just being colourful and cartoony. Anime games all have a very similar art style, and due to the somewhat justified stigma around anime in general, most people will give these games a pass based on the art style alone. A lot of people see an anime art style as lazy and an easy way to grab cash from anime fans, and even I will admit that it is true that a lot of anime games tend to be of lower quality, with the art style carrying the sales. However, there are games like Persona 5, I'm sure you're tired of hearing about Persona 5 by now, but please bear with me, in which the game breaks through this barrier by being so stylistic with a bombastic aesthetic despite having an anime art style, and it is a great example of how to use your art style to your advantage. Graphics are such a complex and double-edged part of games that both good and bad graphics can be both helpful or detrimental to a game. It's all down to the players. Despite what most gamers would like to think, graphics are important, and for some people, the most important part of a game. While I do think that a lot of people are missing out on amazing experiences due to older graphics not being appealing to them, like myself, I think that we need to stop being so dismissive of people who find the importance in high quality graphics. Next time you play that new game you just picked up, think about how much effort went into what you see in front of you and how much it's affecting the amount of fun you're having. But that's enough about graphics. We have a lot of important aspects of video games to cover today. This next section covers what I believe to be just as important, if not more so, than graphics. And that's... Here's the part of game design that I really feel doesn't get enough attention from people. Sound design is so important to making a game fun. When I say sound design, I mean both music and sound effects. Before I get into the nitty-gritty explanations, let's do a little exercise. I want you to close your eyes for me. Nothing's going to be on the screen right now, so you might as well do it anyway. I just want you to think about what comes to mind when I do this. With absolutely no visuals whatsoever, you can still tell that this song means that it's about to go down. A great and powerful threat has just descended down on you, and you have to be ready to tackle it. Even if you've never played Final Fantasy VII or its remake, you've probably heard this song before, One-Winged Angel. Now, if you threw this song into some random album as just a song on its own, then it wouldn't be nearly as memorable as it is today, because it's the theme for the final boss of one of the greatest games ever made, for one of the greatest villains ever written, Sephiroth. The amazing visuals of the boss combined with the cool gameplay mechanics the fight employs is what brings this song to life, same as it enhances those exact aspects of the game. You can't have Sephiroth without One-Winged Angel, and you can't have One-Winged Angel without Sephiroth. Music can easily make or break a game for some people. The Ocarina melodies from Ocarina of Time live rent-free in the heads of a lot of people who played that game because of how catchy and well composed they are. I'm sure anyone watching this video can easily think of their favourite song from a game, but try to think about why you love that song. Was it the circumstances of the events in the game that accompanied it? Was it that you strongly relate to the character that it's based around? Maybe the song made an otherwise cool moment totally badass. Perhaps the song brought you to tears during an emotional time. Chances are that moment was elevated by the music and wouldn't be nearly as impactful without it. On the opposite side of things, some games don't actually have a lot of music, and this is actually by choice. This can work really well. For example, Shadow of the Colossus has no overworld theme, just the silence of you traversing the empty landscape. But then, this helps the music that plays when a battle begins hit so much harder, or when a cutscene plays an emotional beat that makes you question what you're doing is right. Sometimes, a lack of music can really add to the experience, and the best games will know when to use music and when not to, which can be a hard balance to find, and I think is extremely underappreciated. One of the most popular upcoming video games at the moment is Friday Night Funkin', a game that's all about its music. While, like mentioned previously, the art style helps this game along, the music is such an important part of all rhythm games, but Friday Night Funkin' especially. There are clearly a lot of people out there who appreciate video games with stellar music, as FNF smashed its Kickstarter goals and raised literally millions of dollars. An indie rhythm game did this, and I think that's really awesome. I think I've gotten the point across about music and its importance to how fun a game can be. The perfect moment when gameplay, visuals and music just clicks and creates something unforgettable just cannot be beat. I would really like to hear what other people have in mind when it comes to moments like this, so please let me know. But now let's move on to the other part of sound design that is critical, and that is sound effects. I'm gonna play a clip for you real quick. No need to close your eyes this time, as the visual aspect is just as important as the sound here. Take a look/listen. I think you get where I'm going with this. While a lot of the satisfaction of the parry from Dark Souls is the skill required to pull it off, and the time it takes to attain that skill, the sound that you get as your reward to confirm you've done it right is so goddamn satisfying and feels great. Dark Souls is considered a hard game anyway, more on that later, so mastering a difficult technique in an already difficult game is fulfilling on its own. The parry sound is just the very impactful icing on the cake. Imagine a parry without this sound effect. Well, you don't need to, as that's what happens when you miss a parry. The lack of the sound effect really hits home how great it feels to hit a parry, and how much it sucks to miss one. Having an appropriately cool sound to go along with an action in a game, whether that action is simple or complex, is crucial to making a game fun. You need to feel the weight of your actions when you hit a button for that fun feeling to kick in, complementing the gameplay, visuals and music into one awesome package. Like for example, this game.
How about I take it in a Go to hell. Now I'm
And that's it for the sound design section of this video. Now, we've talked about all of the easy stuff. It's time to get into some slightly more abstract concepts when it comes to what makes a game fun. It's going to be a bit more difficult to explain as we move forward, but that's appropriate, as the next thing we're going to talk about is... In spite of the joke I made in that last sentence, this is actually a hard topic to nail down. While everyone can have identifiable tastes when it comes to genres of games, gameplay, music, and graphics/art styles, difficulty is much more... how do I put this? Fluid? I like to think of difficulty in games as a line with multiple points on it, with easy and hard being at each end, and everything else is somewhere in between. The problem with this line of thinking, haha, is that while you can put a game on that line pretty easily by how hard it's intended to be by the developers, that changes when it comes to the players. Everybody finds different games difficult or easy. The same guy who can do a 360 weapon swap parry in Dark Souls might struggle with strategy or puzzle games, whereas others may take one look at an XCOM battle, for example, and instantly know how to win. But they might not be able to get past the first few levels of Devil May Cry with anything higher than a C ranking. So here's a hot take for you. I think all games should have difficulty settings. Yes, even the Souls games.
You what?
That's right, I'm taking a bite into that sour lemon of a discourse. But some games are hard by design, I hear you say, and yes, you are free to play on the hardest difficulty and take pride in the fact that you beat it as such, but that doesn't mean that someone who isn't as good at the game as you shouldn't also have the opportunity to play said game. I don't understand the mentality of gatekeeping games because of difficulty, especially if you want the community surrounding the game to grow. Let people play games the way they want to. If they truly love the game, they'll come back to play in higher difficulties. I play the Souls games casually now as I find them pretty easy, but I didn't find them easy at the start and I summoned for help a lot of times. But now I can parry and do other fancy techniques to play the game by myself just fine. You always say get good, so actually let players do so, or let them have the choice to simply not have to. But now to the bottom line. Does difficulty make games fun? It certainly can. The rush of beating something you've been struggling with can give you a feeling like nothing else. The fun comes from overcoming those challenges placed before you, especially if the game gets easier as it goes on because of how you improve skill-wise. But some people have fun just absolutely dominating a game on easy mode, a bit like a power fantasy. This is totally legitimate, and something I do as well sometimes if I'd rather just enjoy a game. Also, some people prefer to play story-driven games on a lower difficulty to, you know, enjoy the story. Difficulty, whether easy or hard, can affect how fun a game can be. You can overcome immense adversity or absolutely dominate anything in your way. Play your games the way you want to. Let's move on now, as there's not actually much more to say on difficulty. I already know I'm going to get some hate for the Souls thing, so let's get into the next section. We've already touched on this next section in various parts of this video, so it's time to talk about something that, while not a huge factor in some games, is a crucial part of most modern gaming, and that is... So here's a weird one. Story can either be one of the most important aspects of a game's fun factor, or the least important. This usually comes down to either how the story is told or the quality of the story itself. If there isn't really a prominent story in a game, like if it's communicated by context clues or bits of lore gathered from characters and items, the story probably won't impact how fun a game actually is. In fact, a lack of straightforward narrative can actually enhance a game's fun factor by allowing fans to come up with their own theories as to what's actually happening to fill in the gaps. The Five Nights at Freddy's series of games is as popular as it is today in no small part to this idea alone, as fans have been trying to put together the plot of these games ever since August of 2014. That's when the first game came out. Well then, let's move on to a more extreme version of this side of things, and that's games that have little to no story at all. While 99% of games have at least some story, it can be as minimal as just setting a goal for the player and calling it a day. The princess is kidnapped, go save her. This is not a bad thing at all, as some games are meant to put you straight into the action by design and can definitely make a game more fun for someone if they don't feel like they need to sit through cutscenes before getting to actually play. A lot of older games did this due to hardware limitations, so while you'll see it in a lot of classics, it's common practice for games nowadays to have at least some simple narrative that unfolds as the game goes on, for better or for worse. I think this is also why movie adaptations of games rarely end up being good, as you're removing everything else about a game to only tell a story, which, as we've just discussed, is not why most people enjoy games. Games can have no story and still be fun, just look at Tetris. But a lack of story can also be less fun for a player. They may want some motivation to play the game aside from just a simple goal, which is actually my personal preference as well. But now let's flip the coin. A lot of games are driven by their story, sometimes being the aspect that's focused on the most. Games that are narrative driven make up a lot of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, like The Last of Us. Think about it this way, if The Last of Us didn't have the incredible and emotional story it did, most would have just written it off as another zombie game with some decent gameplay. But due to the game having such an incredible narrative, the game was made way more fun for pretty much everyone that played it, making them want to see it through to the end. On the flip side though, The Last of Us 2 is looked upon pretty negatively by people due to its inferior story. While despite being much longer, much better looking, and better designed gameplay wise. So when playing The Last of Us, the story helps you to get to the end of the game because you're invested in it, but in the sequel, you keep playing because the gameplay is good despite the story bringing it down. I'm not going to go into too much detail as to why I think The Last of Us 2's story is bad, but it does prove my point that a bad story can drag down a good game and make it less fun. I personally believe the game suffers from being a poorly told revenge story with a very unsatisfying conclusion and odd pacing in places, which brought down my enjoyment of the game. I still found the game fun, but not because of its story. A bad story can also not affect the fun factor at all, as if it's secondary to other aspects of the game, it'll just fade into the background whilst you enjoy everything else. Let's quickly move on from that to go into the furthest extreme of narrative-driven games, and that's games that actually sacrifice gameplay for story. That's a really strange thing to say out loud, but if done right, it's not as crazy as you think. Detroit Become Human is, in my opinion, this concept done right. The game plays like a movie in which your choices, reactions to events, and understanding of the game can change the outcome of the plot in significant ways. Telltale Studios made absolutely nothing but games like this for years, with their Walking Dead games being extremely successful. I've had a lot of fun with these kinds of games, but they're not as fun for a lot of people for reasons that are easy to see. The whole point of games is to play them, not watch them. This is also why some people struggle with longer JRPG games, as most of that time is taken up by reading dialogue boxes. Story is an odd concept to make heads or tails of when it comes to games. In other entertainment mediums like movies and books, the quality of the story is pretty much everything, but in games, it can go from being one of the most important parts of a game to one of the most inconsequential. People can find fun in a good story, or even a bad one if it ends up making the game funny. Never discount how important narrative is in games, as the proper motivation to carry out in-game actions is crucial to making your game worth playing. Here's another personal example. One of my favourite games is Final Fantasy XV, a game that a lot of people consider to be bad. I can understand that, but the story and characters made it one of my favourite games of all time, especially when all of the DLC was released and added a lot more lore. I also enjoyed the gameplay as well, but the story was definitely what sold me on it. If me saying this invalidates my opinion on narrative in games as a whole to you, then good. I mean, have your own opinions, don't just parrot others. Now, I want to talk about something here that kind of ties into some of the other stuff we've been discussing so far, and that is... Realism in games is neither a good or bad thing, but it does have its positives and negatives. Realism means making games as close to reality as possible when it comes to how their world, visuals, and some aspects of their gameplay are crafted. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a perfect example of both the good and the bad when it comes to realism. On the one hand, you have one of the greatest looking and detailed game worlds ever made, where environments and interactions with any NPC you find serve to make the world that almost feels real. But this same level of realism also makes you open every single drawer and pick up every single can of beans whenever you try to loot something, which can get annoying very quickly. Realism can also be detrimental when a game tries to be as realistic as possible, but then suddenly breaks away from that realism to do video game stuff, which can really pull you out of the experience. Using Red Dead as an example again, the overabundance of shootouts that happen in the game, especially ones that seem to clash with the narrative the game is trying to push, really can dampen the experience. When your fanbase says that the best mission of your western shooter is the one where you build a house, you might have messed up somewhere. With the advances in technology when it comes to graphics and even things like VR, there may be a point where video games become indistinguishable from reality. And when they do, will games still be fun? Will they be even more fun? I guess we'll see if we ever get there. But now it's time to move on to the next section, which is one I'm very excited to talk about, as I feel like it affects me more than the other sections of this video, and that is... Now, if you saw my last video, which I will have linked at the top right of the screen, I talk a lot about how immersion is extremely valuable to me when it comes to playing video games. Being able to get completely invested in whatever I'm playing really elevates the fun factor when I play games. This is why open world games and RPGs are my favourite video game genres, as world building is such an essential focus of these games, so it's very easy to become immersed. I'll admit to being that guy who buys Skyrim multiple times, as it's just the perfect game for immersion, with the ability to make your story truly your own with the character creator and the near infinite ways you can approach the game when it comes to playstyle, and even what quests you do. And this is not even mentioning the thousands upon thousands of mods that amplify all of these factors by 1,000. In fact, most games with character creation tend to get me immersed, as being able to project myself onto whatever game I'm playing really helps me get into it. I like to self-insert, sue me. But being able to immerse yourself in some sort of fantasy separate from your own life is an experience like no other, and I think it's a shame that not everyone can immerse themselves easily. Immersion is unique when it comes to having fun, as you can still have fun without being immersed, but if you do get immersed, ooh, you're in for a good time. Cool moments get you more hype, emotional moments enlist a stronger reaction, and funny moments can be made even funnier. Immersion can be such a huge factor for people like myself, but a total non-factor for others while still not affecting how much fun they have. Weird, isn't it? Here's something even weirder. You can become so immersed in a game that you keep playing it even though you're actively not having fun. Now I bet I sound crazy to you, but this actually happened to me once. A bit of personal backstory here, I'm not good with horror. At all. I'm such a scaredy cat when it comes to horror, but I've never played any horror game for more than like an hour, or at least until the scary stuff starts happening, in which I proceed to scream, freak out, and then never play the game again. Except for one time. A few years ago I played Soma, a horror game based at the bottom of the ocean. This would be doubly scary for me as I have thalassophobia, a fear of the ocean. Yet, this was during a time where I knew I wouldn't have internet for a while, so I downloaded a huge backlog of PlayStation Plus games that I hadn't played yet. One of these was Soma. Here's the thing, I actually finished Soma. I did, a horror game about my biggest fear, and I finished it. And I did not have fun the entire time I played. So, why did I continue? Well, I was immersed. The feeling of dread and terror the game instilled in me actually made me keep going. Like I had to see this nightmare to the end so I could break out of it. Then, when I got to the meat and potatoes of the narrative, that made me question what it meant to be alive. That was it. Soma is the only horror game I've completed to this day, and might be the only one I ever will. I've never felt such a unique feeling of immersion that I got from Soma again, and I'm not sure I want to. Except I needed background footage for this video, so I decided to leave my mic on while I captured it. So, small side note while I was gathering footage for the video. Soma, the horror game, actually has an option to play in a safe mode in which the monsters can't kill you, but you can still experience the story. For story-driven horror games, that's a great set of accessibility, and I appreciate that. Good on you, devs. That really helps me make my point. But, I'm not going to do that. Why do I do this to myself? Oh.
Can figure this out.
I don't remember anything. I've beaten this game before, but I don't remember a damn thing about it. Yeet. What the hell was that? Oh, I don't like this already. God, the worst part is I've beaten this game before, but I don't want to play it again. Oh no. Lovely. I only need to get through the first monster encounter. Oh. I just got jump scared by a door I wasn't expecting it to open. Get a decent amount of footage and then be gone. No. No. Open. Oh. Oh. Don't do that. I thought that was something then. That is what the enemies look like though, I think. Like these things. Wait. My screen's glitching. Why is my screen glitching? Okay, I'm just gonna hide in the corner of a room. I'm gonna be happy right here. I'm gonna use this thing for self-defense. Oh. No.
this even where I'm supposed to... Stop it!
How did I do that?
Mamma mia! Okay, something's here, something's here, something is here, something is here, something is here, something is here. Something is here, something is here, something is here. What the hell? God, don't do this to me. Ah! No. Oh no. That was a solid wall a minute ago, and now it isn't. I've literally beaten this game. I don't know why I'm still scared. So this is how good this game is. No. No. Oh god, where is it? Will it react? Nope, 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 nope. Nope.
Immersion is such a driving force when it comes to enjoyment or even investment in a game. While not every game needs to be immersive to be fun, no game won't benefit from being immersive. Problem is, you can't really build your game to be immersive, as every player will get immersed in different things, but you can always try. Now, this next section is going to cover what I feel is the exact opposite of immersion. These types of games can be so far removed from the others, as they are made from the ground up with different design philosophies in mind. And that is... Now, this is going to be the section of the video that I am the least experienced in, and as such this will be as much of a question to gamers as a whole, as much as I'll be discussing it. Why are competitive games fun? Are they even fun at all? I ask this because I'm not really into playing games competitively, and with the perspective of an outsider looking in, it surely doesn't seem fun. I get that I must be missing something here, but what exactly? Let me explain myself here a little bit. Whenever I see popular clips of people playing competitive games, it's usually bursts of rage and insult flinging like "you're trash" or "get off this game", etc. Whether it's a game like Call of Duty Warzone, fighting games, or others of the kind. I've played fighting games, and I can see the fun in finding new combos and things you realise a character can do, but when you start playing in a competitive setting, even if it's just ranked matches online, that joy seems to be replaced with pure, I don't know, try-hard energy. I can tell I am spouting a completely ignorant viewpoint here, so this is why I want to hear from people who play these games if that's possible. But for now, I want to talk about why I think competitive games might be fun, even though I'm not sure myself. I can definitely see the fun factor in beating someone else in a game, but it seems fleeting. It's only there in that moment, not throughout the whole time you play. Maybe it's the idea of beating yourself, being better at the game than you used to be. I can see the fun in that too, but I personally don't experience that, even in single-player games. I tend to see competitive games as being a lot of stress and pressure, with very little time where it feels as though you're actually having fun. I can try to draw from my own experience too, I guess, in which a game I semi-regularly play is Dead by Daylight. Now I know, DBD is not a true competitive game, It's imbalanced to a fault with it being a 1v4, but the game is analysed and played with such precision at the highest level of skill that it's basically like playing a competitive game. There's even tournaments. I tend to play as the Survivors, which is the 4-person team in this 1v4. I really like the team aspect more than anything else in the game, and being able to work as a team to overcome a massive obstacle in the form of a murderous player character can be extremely fun and extremely frustrating. I really hate to end this segment with the answer, at least for me, being the friends we made along the way, but when you consider how many competitive games are team games, maybe you can see where I come from with this idea. Now, let me finish this segment by repeating my earlier question. Why do you play competitive games? How are they fun for you? I'm going to make a loose segue into the next section here by saying that competitive games sport some of the longest amount of hours played out of all games. So let's talk about how a game's fun factor can be affected by what is the point of coming back to a game that you've already beaten? Replay value, that's why. Games with good reasons to come back are amongst the most fun out there, because if a game is good enough to come back to, that means it was extremely fun the first time around. Pretty much any game can have replay value for someone, but some games are designed around it. Roguelikes are an entire genre based around this very concept, with the game Hades being one of the most critically acclaimed games in recent memory. There are very few games designed to be one-and-done experiences nowadays, with a lot of games at least featuring some form of new game plus to keep the ball rolling even after beating it. Games that have multiple endings, character customization, randomized loot, multiplayer aspects, etc. all have massive replay value as they require a lot of time to truly get everything out of. Of course, this can also run the risk of becoming repetitive, as mentioned before, but even more so than usual this time. This is another double-edged sword, as you need to consider that a lot of people who play your game might not have enough time to dedicate to it and still be able to see everything. It all needs to balance out. Give your players enough content to be satisfied the first time around, while still keeping enough away to come back for more. You also need to make a good enough game to come back to, so making a game with the previous sections of this video appeal to as many people as possible is pretty much impossible. Weirdly enough, the games that have the most replay value tend to be games like Animal Crossing, the most laid-back game ever, or competitive games again. What a player values enough to return to a game multiple times, or even continuously, is a total enigma at the end of the day, and it's clear that there's no solid formula for replay value. So next time you find yourself returning to a game for the umpteenth time, think about why. What exactly is making you come back? Is it fun, or something else? Let's hope it's fun. This was a small section, but I wanted to talk about it even though there isn't much to say, as it's still a huge part of the fun factor. Games with good character customization, for example, get a few dozen more hours out of me usually, so replay value can definitely bring a ton of fun. Let's move on to our next topic, which goes more in depth about something I briefly touched upon in the very first section of this video, and that is as I've already said, a game that is unique doesn't automatically mean it's good. Same as how a game that is formulaic can be good regardless. With the fact that games can now be made by pretty much anyone with a computer, there aren't many concepts that haven't been tried already. This is why a lot of games, especially AAA titles, try to play it safe by following a formula that works. And they work for a reason. Despite how everyone complains when a new Pokemon game is the same as the last, they still play them anyway because the basic formula is fun. There's nothing wrong with games of the same genre following the same structure to make a good game, and this is why I get confused when people get mad at one game for being similar to another. You don't want more good games? Question mark. The new Kirby game that got revealed recently was being called a Mario Odyssey reskin, like that's somehow a bad thing? Mario Odyssey is considered one of, if not the greatest Mario game ever made. What's wrong with more of that? And don't get me started on Breath of the Wild clones, air quotations. And then you have games that, while they may be formulaic for the most part, they have one unique aspect that sets them apart from the rest. God of War had a unique feature in the fact that the whole game was one completely unbroken camera shot, as in, the camera never left Kratos' shoulder, not even for loading screens, as there were none. Or how in Watch Dogs Legion, the game is a fairly standard open world game, aside from the fact that you can play as literally any NPC in the game, having small things that other games don't do or don't do as well can really enhance the fun factor when you just sit down and play. A game doesn't have to have every aspect of it be unique. I mean, that's pretty much impossible to do nowadays anyway, what hasn't already been done, but it's still nice to have that one little thing that just sets the game apart and really stands out in your mind as, hey, that's pretty cool. But say that a game boasts that it does a bunch of things that have never been seen before, or that it was going to be revolutionary. When was the last time a game like this ever turned out well? Cyberpunk, anyone? That's a joke. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. We wouldn't have games like we do today if games weren't ambitious. The advancements in technology, trying new things, Super Mario 64. But a game being unique doesn't automatically make it good. There's some reasons some ideas stay as ideas. The point that I'm trying to make here is that don't let games that tread similar ground affect you having fun. There's nothing wrong with good game design, even if it's passed around a bunch. But obviously, if you are tired of playing similar games over and over, then I can understand wanting to step away from certain games that do the same things as others. Again, play what you enjoy. Nothing wrong with that. But let's say that you don't even need to do what a game is designed for to have fun. Well, what do I mean by this? Let's take a look at I think it's clear at this point that fun is something that each player experiences differently. But any game's fun can run out eventually, right? Well, what if I don't want to stop playing regardless of this? You see, that is where a player's ability to make their own fun comes in. Fun is the main thing this video circles around, so while this topic isn't unique to video games, it is important to discuss. Anyone can make their own fun when playing a game, and it can come in any form, but I'm going to focus on two of the most popular forms of this that have seen a rise in popularity on the internet: speedruns and challenge runs. I bet you've seen video titles like this all over the internet, where someone says, can you beat this game while playing under this ridiculous limitation? Well, that's most likely a challenge run. It's a way of making your own fun by playing the game with some sort of self-imposed limitation or challenge that makes the game harder, maybe even impossible. The most classic and popular version of this is the Nuzlocke, where someone plays a Pokemon game where if a Pokemon faints, it stays dead and cannot be used, and you have to restart your game if you run out of Pokemon. Or permadeaths, which is the same, but you restart the game if you die once, and can be done in any game. Challenges like these can turn games on their heads, breathing new life into them and giving them, guess what, replay value. It's also such a great way to bring communities together to come up with and attempt these challenges that some games become almost entirely different entities than what they were originally designed as. I mean, when was the last time you saw someone replay a Souls game and it wasn't a challenge run? It's basically the way those games are played as standard now. And that only speaks to the quality of these games that give the players the freedom to do this stuff. The most extreme version of this concept, at least in my opinion, is speedrunning. Speedrunning is the act of playing a game with a little timer in the corner of your screen and trying to finish that game with the number in that timer being as small as possible. This leads to glitches, exploits, thousands of hours of analysing different strategies to optimise the route to finishing the game as quickly as possible. And it's been around as long as video games have. Sometimes games that haven't been played for over a decade gain some new life due to some new glitch or something being discovered that completely changes the way you speedrun a game, and as such, many runners come flocking to it. Tell you what, go look up your favourite game on speedrun.com and see if you realise that the game could be beaten that quickly. There are even some games that are so bad and full of random glitches that they become great speedrunning games. You can make even the worst games ever made fun when you put them in a speedrun context, which is why I think both challenge runs and speedruns are extremely important to video games as a whole. But I'm gonna be a little bit contradictory here. Despite what I just said, I don't think games should be made with either speedruns or challenge runs in mind. The whole point of what makes these kind of things fun is that the players themselves come up with them. Because if the developers implemented a speedrun mode or a challenge mode, then that's not really any different than a difficulty setting. Players need to be able to be the ones at the wheel here, so that when things get discovered they're all the more surprising and interesting, rather than something that the developers themselves intended. You see, if Mario games were designed with the idea of not needing to jump to beat them, then it would be way less impressive when someone actually does it. So now that I've talked about players making their own fun, let's do the opposite. As much as players can make their own fun, there are factors outside of the game itself that can ruin fun. Let's talk about it. At the end of the day, sometimes fun just cannot be had. It's a sad thing, and video games are no stranger to it. Sometimes you just play a game during a rough time in your life, and as such, a game isn't as fun for you since it dredges up memories. Or maybe some news had to come out about how the game studio that made the game you're playing mistreated its employees, and now you have a bad taste in your mouth whenever you play it. Or maybe you won't even play a game from, say, EA because you don't like their business practices. As I've already said, you can justify playing or not playing any game you want for any reason you want, and that is still true. In fact, a big portion of this video has been about how you shouldn't let other people dictate what you can and can't find fun. But what about when there's just no avoiding it? You can easily get swarmed on the internet by trolls and people bashing the things you like, but I think that's something that everyone has come to expect and knows how to deal with at this point. But there's something else. What if a game's fun factor can be ruined by the very people who find it fun? That's right, I'm about to use the F word. Fandoms. If when I mentioned Five Nights at Freddy's, Friday Night Funkin', or Undertale/Deltarune during this video made you recoil, then that's most likely because the fandoms surrounding those games have warped your understanding of what these games actually are. The oversaturation and just general weirdness of a game's fanbase can give you a preemptive or retroactive opinion of what a game is actually like, usually negative, and that's a real shame, but even I have been reluctant to revisit games like Undertale, which is another favourite of mine, because of the stuff that I've seen from the fandom that has just made me see the game in a much more unfair way. I went back and played it recently and I had an absolute blast. All the things I'd seen related to the game from the internet over the years just faded away, and I was able to enjoy the characters, the story, and the world just as much as the first time. I'm sitting here at the end of this script. I'm not really sure how to end this whole thing. I'm kind of new to writing scripts and making videos as a whole, so I'm not really very good at wrapping up all my thoughts. I think I'm just gonna talk about why I made this video in the first place. At the end of the day, I love video games. The good ones, the bad ones, all of them. I tend to be a guy who finds it very hard to see the bad in things, and I can get enjoyment out of pretty much any game. Hell, I have dozens of hours logged into Sonic 06 of all things, just because I like seeing how far I can break the game. It's extremely fun to me. Every day I look at my phone just to see people flinging their opinions at each other without just stopping to enjoy what they love. I swear, people spend more time saying how bad something is, rather than just saying how much they enjoy something else. It's an odd way to live, I gotta admit. I mean, I'm not saying you can't criticize things, of course you can, but when someone says they like something, don't just go out of your way to tell them why they shouldn't. Unless it's something like legally bad, then just report them or something. But as I've stated in the past, I'm not a smart guy. I wasn't making this with the idea of it being some kind of massive essay, I just wanted to talk, I guess. To express these thoughts that roll around in my head every so often, and hey, if this video somehow helps someone think of things in a slightly different way, hopefully more positively, then that would make me happy. Alright, I think I'm done here. This is by far the second biggest project I've ever undertaken, and hopefully I'm actually saying this at the end of a video rather than just leaving at the end of a wall of text in a script. If you made it this far in, I just want to say thanks. Thanks for hearing out some nobody on the internet ramble about something he loves for however long this video ended up being. I appreciate your time, and I would love to hear your own thoughts as well if you leave them down below. Thanks again for watching, and remember to just have fun, no matter what.